to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, the show where we talk about all the crazy stupid stuff that people do in marketing and how you cannot do that. But instead, do smart, meaningful things with your time, effort, budgets, all the stuff when it comes to marketing. And today we have a very exploratory conversation here for today. So my friend Nonso, as part of his title, he has marketing and communications. And then it made me think, marketing and communications, they often go together, but yet they are two different things. And so what if we had a conversation about that? What is marketing? What is communication? What does that look like when they're aligned? What does that look like when they're not aligned? Why do we think that those are two, that they're the same thing? All the things associated with this concept of, even there's a mashup word for it, Marcom, that people often use. And so we're just going to explore that concept today. And as part of that exploration, I really encourage anybody, if you're joining us live, get into the conversation. What is your perspective on marketing? What is your perspective of communication? Did you always think these were the same thing? What do you think now? What are the questions that you have? We're going to explore from our unique experiences in the marketing arena, but all of you have different experiences. So if you are watching live and you are available to share those with us in the chat today, we would really, really appreciate that. It makes the conversation more robust for everybody. For those of you who are joining this show for the first time, welcome. It's great to have you here. This show, as I mentioned, is a little different. Not even just this episode, but this kind of show in general is different from the perspective of this is an exploratory conversation. A lot of other places you go might be giving you things to do or a specific destination. We do not have that on this show. It is about exploring. It's about trying on new perspectives, ideas, what fits you, what doesn't fit you, and being able to take that and run with it instead of taking what some internet expert told you should do, which actually falls into the stupid part of crazy stupid marketing. Don't just do stuff because someone told you to do it. Do it because you know why. Your reason. You have a good reason. If you are joining us for not the first time, welcome back. We're super happy to have you back in the conversation, in the exploration. And with that, let's get into it, shall we? Let's go on a marketing archaeology journey into marketing and communications. But before we do that, Nonso, would you like to give us a little bit of background on you? And actually, I would love to know, why do you choose to identify as someone who focuses on both marketing and communications?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Tracy. Good to be back again. This is going to be my second one. The first one was more of a panel, and this is just me and you. So you're stuck with me for the rest, for the next 1 hour. And also, congratulations. So this is like the 80th episode. Wow.
It is. Can you guys believe that already? Man. Boom.
Yeah. So that is I'm very happy to be part of this milestone. So about me, as you know, I delved into marketing and communications 7 years ago, I would say. I started that really professionally. And yeah, on my title, you would see marketing and communications because I understand why it's important to have both of them, and I understand what each of them mean differently and what they bring to the table. So I define myself as a marketing and communications professional with core expertise in several things. So from public relations to content to digital media to social media and brand management as well. So these are some of the things that I've actually explored throughout my at least 7 years of being in marketing. And you know how it is. Once you get into this space, you pick a lot of things along the way, you learn a lot of things along the way, and you just continue to evolve yourself. So my background basically started as a public relations specialist. That's where I really got into marketing from. Started working with one of the biggest agencies globally, and then you just get to learn a lot of things. A lot of things have been thrown at you. You understand how people think. You understand how to really, really put products out there. And that is more of the communication side of things, because that really, really help you with understanding messaging, putting out communication in a way that is long-term and it sticks, helping people to get perspective, building reputation, all that juicy part of it. But along my journey, I began to pick up other things as well, and then start getting into other aspects of marketing and communications. And then I started getting introduced into the marketing side of things, where now you're all about the catching people's attention, the reach, the razzle dazzle, the things that make people want to turn their heads and be like, oh, what is happening here? So this whole journey kind of got me to this point where I can confidently say, okay, I am a marketing and communications expert, because throughout my journey, I've been able to master these two aspects, and I've been able to see how we can properly align them. So I'm really interested in, and I'm excited about just sharing my thoughts as to why there is this big confusion, why people use them interchangeably, and then how we can actually identify each of them and then align them to help the greater cause of pushing brands.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start by creating, for the sake of this episode, some definitions with the terms communication and marketing, because out in the wide world you can find lots of definitions for all of those things. And even you, Nonso, you mentioned a lot of different marketing tactics or marketing categories, maybe I would say, when you were talking about communication. And so when you're thinking about the concept of communicating, maybe which is the verb version of communication being the result of communicating, what does that verb look like? What does it entail?
Oh yeah. So as you said, there are like a lot of definitions to what communications is or what marketing is. And we have several bodies, like even the Canadian Marketing Association, the American Marketing Association. Everybody coming up with their own definition as to what exactly it means. And for me, I'm not the kind of person that would like to be stuck in definitions, because it all comes down to semantics of like, you said this, you did not say this. And then there is definitions of marketing as well as to regards to what it is. And then just looking at all this definition, there are some things that I kind of say this is what the meat of it is. And for communications is basically that set of activities that you do to be able to help, number one, make people understand your brand, build trust and reputation, and have them have a perception of your brand. So you're not just coming out flat, you're about something. So for me, it's more about the depth. The main purpose of communication is to help people understand. And then when they understand, they can trust. So at the end of the day, you're doing communication to build trust, because they feel like they know you, they have an understanding of the brand, they've built a perception about the brand, and that is what communication does. Communication is more long term and consistent, because it's not something that you get results when you just do, you do today and then you jump and people will be like, okay, yeah, we know you now. It's like you have to do it consistently. And then the interesting thing about communication is the only aspect that actually takes care of the two large audiences. So the external and the internal as well. So you hear people say internal communication. And the main reason why is because it's important that people inside understand as much as people outside understand.
Or
Because
maybe more so, some would argue.
yeah. So communications takes care of, internal communications, making sure that everybody's carried along, and making sure that that vision resonates with everybody internally and people understand what you're doing. So it aligns with the external, which is more of getting people to understand you better, making them have trust and making them build a perception while you continue to build reputation. So communication is more long-term, consistent. You don't have a lot of flexibility, but there are a lot of ways you can actually communicate. Whereas marketing, on the other hand, again, quite a number of definitions. People are going to say quite a number of things at the end of the day. But again, one thing that you have to pick that brings everything together is that marketing helps you with the action part. So while communication helps you with understanding, trust, reputation, marketing helps you with help getting people to take an action. So the purpose of marketing is set of activities that you do that drives awareness and then makes people want to act. So at the end of the day, you want them to buy something. So you're throwing things at them. Marketing is a lot more flexible than communication, because it changes over time. There are different trends, there are different channels, there are different stories, there are different marketing campaigns. You see some brands in a year, they have like 3 or 4 um, marketing campaigns that they run, different depending on different things, but their communication has to stay the same over that period of time. So for me, that's the best way to think about it. Think about it as, what is the end goal? What are you trying to do with this? Marketing action, that's what you should think about. What do I do to make people take an action, to make people like me, to make people feel like, okay, there is something here. And then communication is depth. So marketing is reach, communication is depth. And then when you get their attention, what are you about? They would want to know, to say, okay, this is what this guy is about, this is what this brand is about. And then that is where that trust begin to come, that building begin to come. And then there are various ways you can actually do it. So that is my best way of helping people to understand it, because if you get caught up in like definitions, at the end of the day, it just gets mixed up. But if you're able to say, this is what this achieves, this is what this achieves, then it's better to understand it that way.
Oh, and I think that's really helpful too. We did actually an episode last week on the myth of the MQL. And I feel like this framing would have been helpful as part of that conversation too, in looking at the depth versus the reach, because I think when we're talking about trust, we can go out and we can get a whole bunch of reach. But if we're not doing any activities that create that depth, then we're not ever moving that reach into a trust area. And if the reason we're getting the reach is to deliver on a goal, which is a sale at the end of the day, again, I mean, if you're selling lip gloss, then you only need a teeny amount of trust, right? But if you're selling a Mercedes, or you're selling a $1 million business transformation, right? Like, people got to trust you. And if they don't, it doesn't matter how many digital ads you sent out. It's actually funny because I mentioned digital ads, and I was actually sharing with someone the other day. I'm like, did a digital ad ever build trust for you? Can a digital ad be in the right place at the right time, where you're like, yes, I needed that thing? Yeah, it can, right? But did it build trust? Did it really do that? Or was there something else that did that? And as you mentioned, there's lots of different ways to do that. So we don't generally get into tactics on this show, because you could use a variety of ways to accomplish the thing. But I think this is a really nice way to look at the separation between the two, but then also leading into the next part of the conversation. What is the danger? Or have you seen scenarios where people assume they're the same thing? And then what is the danger in assuming that they're the same?
Oh yeah, I think there is actually a danger, which a lot of the time is not. It doesn't just creep up on you. It's kind of over time you begin to see that you are not building a brand. Now, communication is the foundation for helping to build a brand. Marketing is for being able to turn that brand into people buying and taking action as well. Right. So in the case where you see people start mixing up both of them, you begin to see a lot of gaps, mainly because they're either going to be focusing on one too much, and the other is going to be more like, a given. We don't necessarily need this, again, because they are not thinking about what the outcome of both is. And then, just as you said, for example, like, can a digital ad, for example, build trust? The problem is not just like the digital ad. That is one thing you should do. But just imagine that you focus too much on things that are just helping to build that reach. People know about your brand. People have a lot of, they are aware. But what is that thing that makes them decide to say, okay, I've seen this thing, I like this ad, it turned my eyes, but why would I make a decision? Because at the end of the day, marketing and communication is supposed to be aligned to help you to that goal of making your business profitable or making people take the actions you want them to take. But the biggest danger is that you see people start focusing too much on one thing, and a lot of the cases, the communication aspect suffers most of the time, because people see marketing is usually more flash, yeah. So people see that most of the time, and then they they just run with it. They're like, yeah, it's very interesting. Let's just keep doing this. People are seeing us. We have the impressions. But at the end of the day, the depth is not there. So the biggest danger is that if you're running like your marketing and communications in that, you're basically running like your whole like integrated marketing in that sense, while neglecting one, there's always going to be a gap. And I think one of the trends that I see is, a lot of B2, if you notice, a lot of B2B businesses focus heavier on communications because it takes time to build that trust, and what they require or what they're demanding from their customers is usually huge commitments. So they're going to be focusing on things that make them seem very credible, seems like reputation, build perception, while some B2C, just focus on communications. Let's reach more people, let's reach more people. So the biggest problem there would be finding that balance. If you mix up both of them, there's always going to be a gap. And that is you focusing too much on one and then leaving the other. I have seen quite a number of examples in real life brands. I don't know if I should mention names, but
I mean, I already mentioned Mercedes on here, although it was kind of in a bipartisan way. I would just say, well, if it's somebody that you'd think would not like their company name shared, then you can keep the name to yourself. But I think sharing the use case is helpful.
Oh yeah. No, so it's just that there are quite a number of brands that I've seen lately. Maybe now they're beginning to make that adjustment where the focus was heavily on marketing at first, and then you'd see that in the way that people were responding to their to them in. And I think one of the biggest example, this, don't worry, I don't think they'll have a problem with this, is I think the Temu brand. I'm sure you must have seen it. The Temu, that's Temu.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think at first their market, they were focusing heavily on marketing, like digital ads. Everywhere you go, you see them. They showed up on the Super Bowl. They became really big, right? But then on the other hand, there was the communication aspect missing. There was the depth. People were still not very sure. Like, yeah, we see them every day, but are they real? Things like that. And if you go on Google, for example, and just search for that name of the brand, you kind of see that, because there's a lot of things about people saying, are these people really trustworthy? Who are they? Where, why should I trust them? Several big news channels, trying to figure out if I should go or not. And that's just to show you that the depth aspect was actually missing in that initial aspect, where it was just like, hey, let's make sure we blast this thing to everywhere. And then some people caught on it, but a lot of people were very skeptical. And that is just a big example to say that that communication aspect needs to actually be built simultaneously with you building the marketing aspect. You need to be about something, and people need to know that you're about something. And then it kind of helps to go faster. But as you said, there are some brands that can get away with just pushing one, because for some people, it's not a big commitment. If things go wrong, I'll be fine. But there are some other kind of brands that cannot make that mistake, because I have to be sure, and communications help me with that sure aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, the word that I keep coming back to is trust, right? There's some things that you don't really have to trust it to buy, right? If
Yeah.
I buy this Timu dress for $2.77 and I never get the dress, then like, it's like, it's
Yeah.
not great, but it's not like that bad, right? Whereas if I'm going to Nordstrom to pay $500, $600 for a dress, or even more at other, like the high-end Nordstrom stuff, then you want to know that like this is gonna last, and I have a like way to come back to the store if something goes wrong, and all of these different types of things. So different level of purchases also need that different level of trust.
Trust, yeah.
And I think it is interesting that you say, because we also like, I always think it's funny to talk about B2B and B2C, because there's B2B that is small, right? Like I can sign up for a Zoom account for $20 a month, and most people are like, yeah, good, right? Like I don't really think about that much money, and that is B2B. Or I can buy a Hot Wheels car, B2C, for like $2 at Walmart, and I'm like, yep, good, right? Like I don't really think about it that much. But you could also be in B2B and or B2C with that like higher ticket type of investment. I mean, I did. One of the things that I'm thinking of is like custom homes, right? So technically that's B2C, but these people are spending like $5 million to build a house. So they like really want to trust somebody to do a good job with that versus again, like the Hot Wheels at the store.
Yeah.
And then same thing with like, I might just throw $20 at Zoom so I can have the paid version. So I can have more than 40 minutes. 40 minutes is such a random number. Or I could be buying $1 million business transformation from a B2C or $1 million consulting gig from Boston Consulting Group. And then all of a sudden you're like, maybe I want to do a little more due diligence. So I think it's important, like for any marketers who are watching today, to pay attention to like what level of trust is required in the client relationships in order to serve them properly. And if it is very little, then maybe you can heavily lean on marketing. But if it is very high, then heavily leaning on marketing is riskier. Okay, Ellen has a really great question. So I'm going to bring that up. What have you seen work well when it comes to sharing insights between comms and marketing teams? For example, turning media sentiment into campaign ideas or customer data into comms narratives. Thoughts on that? So really it's about sharing insights between reach and depth.
Exactly. Yeah. It's mainly about reach and depth. And I think it's very important that, comms and marketing teams are actually working, together, especially on, several kind of campaigns. So I think it's more of, if there is a consumer feedback, for example, it's important that, okay, the marketing team gets this and it's like, what does this mean? Because the truth is, comms teams will help you to really understand what it really means in terms of, is this a larger trend? Is this a new, way people behave? Is this people how they react to the kind of messaging that we put out? And then that's where you can now start deciding to turn things around to say, okay, maybe we're not saying the right things. We're showing up everywhere, but maybe our message is not resonating. Because another thing that the comms team would help you to do is to ensure that the messaging is right, because that's one thing with comms. It's like we're putting out this marketing campaign and we're showing people up, in different places, but what exactly are we saying? And then it's very important that, for the marketing and the communications team to actually come together to decide to say, this is what we want to say. And then the marketing is going to anchor on that, is going to run on that. So sharing as the question, basically ask is more of finding that balance. If there is, like, from the strategy stage, like from the beginning stage, it's important that the marketing and the communications team sit down together to say, this is what we want to do. This is the messaging. This is how we're going to be pushing it. And then this is what we're going to be doing to ensure that people see it. So the most important thing there is that alignment and that balance to say we're sharing feedback, either feedback from a marketing side, feedback from a comms side, because how I look at it is, at the end of the day, this all contributes to one funnel, right? So somebody sees something, he likes it. There is a consideration state to that. So you're aware, but you want to find out more about it. And then you start to dig, right? You're like, okay, what are these people about? What is this thing really saying? What they're saying, is it really true? Who are the people behind this brand and stuff like that? And then when you start showing the faces behind the brand, you're beginning to delve into the territory of communication, because people want to say, I like this ad, but who is really behind it, right? So the marketing funnel, nobody can control it, right? So I might see communication first, I might see marketing first, but the most important thing is that they work simultaneously. Because if I see an ad, for example, and I'm aware, I am trying to do that whole consideration stage, there's a lot of marketing elements, communication elements that I'm going to have to engage with for me to finally make that decision to convert as well. So I guess it's just more finding the balance between both things for me.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because it's the same for me. Like, my question is then, like, I don't ever necessarily like to say that let's make assumptions. Right? But if we have a marketing team and we have a comms team and we assume they're related, right? So I'm collecting data, you're collecting data. We assume that these are related. They might not be causal, they might not be what have you, but they're related somehow. And because they're related, I have a goal of them being aligned. And so again, whatever insights are coming from here are very minimally insights I'm taking into consideration on the other side, even if it's less about like, can you interpret this data for me? But I think, again, even in your examples, Ellen, like, okay, so we're doing PR. So there will be media sentiment. It will exist unless nobody's seeing our PR, and then that's a different problem. But there is media sentiment. And also, if you're interested in learning about media sentiment, I have a very good friend who just sold the company OneClick to a bigger company who does exactly that, and we could talk about it. But if we have that, like, let's consider it as part of campaign ideas. Does a campaign always need to be dependent on media sentiment? Maybe, maybe not. I think that is like based on an individual brand. Customer data. I mean, personally, I'm a huge fan of constantly collecting data from your actual customers through actual customer conversations. Maybe we'll do a separate episode on that at some point. But if you are going to all that work to collect your customer data, like that's what your customers are saying. So wouldn't it be useful for your comms people to very minimally know it? And then, and I mean, I would say then again, it came right from the customer's mouth. So it would make sense to incorporate it into a narrative. But also, there's interesting things that play in the world of narrative, right? People heard this and they thought this. So then, like, if they think that, do I put that right in there? Is that easier? Or does like them making the connection actually part of the sales process? There's lots of stuff that can be involved in those decisions. But I think, again, like it comes back to, like, let's assume there's a relationship and let's create systems and communication opportunities between the two departments to allow for that.
Yeah. Sorry,
go ahead. Yeah.
To speak a little bit regarding Ellen's question as well. One other thing that is very important to take into consideration, especially when the two teams are aligning, is even before you see the media sentiment or see like customer data and the feedback that you get from the customers, right? Is right from the start, as I said, communications is usually very long term and it takes consistency for it to stick. And even though you want to use media sentiment and customer, data to kind of drive how you communicate, it's important that you make sure it aligns with that long-term consistent communication that you want to have. Because at the end of the day, marketing is actually running off that foundation. So it's not like we're going to say we're about something for now. We're about, maybe this is what we're about. And then simply because, we were beginning to see some kind of media sentiment, and then we're like, okay, now we have to change what we're about. Whatever it is, I think there's mainly has to be aligning with the larger narrative or the larger messaging that the brand has set out to put. So if we said we're a certain kind of brand, irrespective of what we are seeing in the, on the media, the best thing is to, how can we use that information to align, to say, how does this align with what we said we are? Because at the end of the day, you're not necessarily chasing everybody, you're chasing your own tribe. So it's important to use this kind of information and feedback to help, especially with the marketing, for example. Maybe we're getting certain kind of feedback. Marketing is very flexible. It can easily change. But anything that has to start affecting what the overall narrative of the brand is, then we have to start being careful in terms of how we are aligning those.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I feel like there's a lot of market research that gets done, but there's a lot of market research that is really just about like collecting data, and it may or may not be meaningful data. And this is something I also like from an authenticity point of view, I always say for brands too, right? Like if you don't know who you are, then you're just changing with the whims of whoever you're listening to that day. And there's a lot of different people who want a lot of different things in this world. I don't sell refrigerators. That doesn't mean there aren't people who need refrigerators.
Yeah.
So I could be like, oh my God, there's so many people who need refrigerators. Actually, early on in my business, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine. We had done some like personal development program together. And he was like, oh, can I pick your brain? Because I have this online store. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I was like, what do you sell on your online store? And he was like, watches, home gym equipment, and camping equipment. And I was like, okay, like, why do you sell those things? Are you like particularly passionate about those things? And he was like, no, these are the 3 things that sell best in online stores.
Okay.
And I was like, you don't care about any of these things. It's just not the foundation for a scalable marketing program. So sure, you can buy some digital ads and you can advertise your stuff. Absolutely, you can do that. But like, you don't even know why you're selling it. You have no platform for communications whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. And I love what Shehu is saying here. Effective communication is the heart of business success. I think that ties into what you mentioned at the beginning, Nonso, about being internal and external. And marketing, I think very often, although there is internal marketing and people are talking about like employer brands and things like that nowadays, but I still think most often marketing is looked at as an external facing exercise.
Yeah.
We are advertising to our clients so they'll buy stuff. But the communications is more holistic. And I mean, honestly, I guess I would just say, if you're making anything the heart of your business, make it the thing that's the foundation. Don't make it the thing that can change very easily, because, hey, we could just run off on a new marketing campaign next week.
Yeah, right.
Actually, okay, on that note, I want to talk about campaigns. Because also in marketing, it's very common for people to talk about campaigns, and whether that's like an email campaign, or we've got a promotional campaign associated with the Super Bowl, or we've got a promotional campaign associated with a trade show, or there's a lot of people who create campaigns for a lot of different things. And by nature, a campaign is time stamped. It's for this, to do this, right? And so let's just explore this concept of like, can we campaign within communications? Does a campaign always live in marketing? Like, how did the concept of campaigns fit into let's say, the mashup of Marcom?
Yeah. And that's actually a very interesting point you've actually raised. And I think for campaigns, right, one of the thing is, when you're building out a campaign, there is a lot of planning, right? And you're planning for 2 major things. You're planning for, who do we want to talk to, what do we want to say to them, and what do we do to get to these people. And that's where you begin to see that communications has its own stake even in campaigns, and marketing has its own stake even in campaigns. The thing is, marketing is usually very flexible. We can do a lot of things. You can go a lot of places. You can jump on a lot of trends. But communications is where you see it's flexible, but you have to be consistent with what you're saying, right? So, because at the end of the day, if you're running a campaign that is not aligned with the kind of brand that you want to build, people would be able to tell. I've heard people say things like, Apple would not do this, right?
Right.
Because Apple has built a certain kind of brand, and there are certain things that you do not expect them to do. In as much as is a marketing campaign, there are certain things that they can't just do. They can't just jump on it. They cannot just say. So I think in the concept of like planning a campaign, communications helps a lot with agenda setting, and then helping you with what exactly you want to say. So if you go on that campaign, for example, and you don't have substance with regards to what you're saying, you're just literally just screaming at people to say, hey, we are launching a new product, for example, come and buy the product. A lot of people is going to be like, why would I have to buy the product? Or why are you launching a new product? Communication helps you with that. It's going to be like, okay, this is how it aligns with what we've been building. And then this is how it's going to help you. And then that marketing part is going to be that flashy part that gets people to want to take an action. So I think communication works a lot more time in the planning aspect of it, because sometimes campaigns might be just one channel. Maybe you're doing, like you said, an email marketing campaign. You're trying to send out emails to promote something, maybe a new product that you have in the market or something like that. But the communications in that aspect would help you with, what exactly should I say? Is this true with the people, and is this aligned with the brand that I'm trying to build? And then if you're running a maybe bigger or a larger campaign that gives you an opportunity to use several channels, then you can really, really explore both of them, because there are certain channels that is going to be strictly to drive communication. Like, for example, if you're running a campaign and then you want to have a PR element to it, and you have a story that you want to tell, then you can start using like those channels that really, really helps with communications. Like, okay, we want people to see this new product as credible and important. So if we have some credible influencer or journalist talk about it in a very deep way as to how it helps people or why this is important, when people see the ad, they're going to be able to tie it back to say, yeah, this is credible. I saw this on this platform. I saw people talking about it, and then I think I will go ahead and buy it. Or maybe when they see it and they start doing their research, and then they will fall back to this information that is already out there. So definitely, marketing and communications has its place in every campaign that goes out, because it has to help you with communication. There are several really huge brands who have really fell in that whole aspect of communication when pushing huge campaigns, simply because they were just jumping on things. I think an example is Pepsi in 2017, right? Where they had the campaign with, I think, Kendall Jenner, where, it was like, it was a really beautiful campaign in terms of the video, but they were running off of, like social activism and stuff like that. And they got a lot of backlash, because quite interesting. I'm sure they did not see that coming, but people were like, you're trivializing very important issues. And that's just to show you that there was a lack of proper consideration with regards to the messaging. So you just want to jump on the fact that, this is the hot topic right now. Yeah, this is marketing. Marketing jumps on trends, right? It's the hot topic. I go there, I say things, it gets people's attention. But how is it aligned with what I'm trying to say? Like, how does Pepsi align with social activism? It's just like, oh, this is obvious. We see what you're doing. You're just trying to get attention. You put a really popular face on the brand and you think everybody's going to go crazy. But no, there was backlash, because they're like, you're trivializing social issues. And that is why it's important that whenever a campaign is going out, it's important for communications to really think about, what do we want to say? Does it align with what we have been saying right from the beginning? And then marketing will be like, yeah, this is the best way we can actually say these things and make it really, really pop.
Yeah. Well, and I think this brings up an interesting piece for me about innovation, because I feel, one, we are in an economy of constant innovation, but also marketing is an industry of constant innovation. And so marketing is at like the forefront of innovation and for a lot of the time. And when we think about like an authentic innovation versus what your example is, kind of like bandwagon jumping, right? And it's easy to jump on bandwagons. I was even like, the company I worked for during the whole George Floyd thing was like, we need to post about Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, well, I'm like with you on the fact that Black Lives Matter, but we've never talked about it before. We don't employ any Black people, right? Like, how is this not us just jumping on a bandwagon like everybody else? If we want to turn it into a thing that we actually care about, like, let's do that from a meaningful way. And then I'm happy to share that from a marketing perspective. But like, it's too easy from a social media perspective just to like jump on stuff, and then people have jumped on the new thing. And then as a consumer, like, I don't know what you actually believe here. Yeah. So like, again, these are not the types of activities that lead to trust. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be innovating, right? Like there's always up, and the market's always changing, and our consumer base is always changing, and their needs are always changing, and there is a need to innovate. And so like, from that kind of marketing communications relationship perspective, how does that play? How does that play out, or how do they interact together to enable marketing innovation?
Yeah, so it's when you're at the end of the day, as I said, you should always be thinking about what is the output that you want, right? Just because of marketing generally, integrated marketing is evolving, And it's because people are evolving, right? Marketing follows people. It goes where everybody goes. It goes where the technology goes, or it uses the technology available to get through to people. At the end of the day, you're trying to do one thing. You want to get in front of people and you want to convince them to take an action, right? So if you understand the basis of why you were doing marketing in the first place, then innovation becomes easy, because a lot of people are tied, to the fact that, for communications, we have to use just certain channels. It has to be serious. We have to make sure, a lot of the way people think about it, and the marketing, we can be like, a little bit more flashier as well. But I think understanding human behavior, understanding how humans consume information would begin to help you to understand how to bring in that innovation for, like, as you said. So for innovation for communications, for example, we look like, yeah, we're jumping on social media, for example, is a technology that is now making communications very easy. For you as somebody in communications, or in that space, your thinking would be, human behavior is evolving because there is new technology. How do I use this new technology to still pass that message consistently? And
Right.
then marketing is going to be thinking about it in the sense, say, this message that we want to pass, this brand that we're building, and this new product that we want to sell, for example, how do we use the new technology in line with how human beings are beginning to think and consume information to, because I feel like if you don't understand that background or that foundation, then innovation would be anything. It's just going to be like jumping on anything that anybody says, but really, really, is there innovation? If your goal is not, if you're not reaching your goal through a maybe a new flashy means, then what's the point of actually jumping on it? So I strongly believe that for marketing innovation, how it looks like, especially when it comes to like Marcoms, marketing and communications, is understanding how human beings think, understanding how they access and consume information, and then using that opportunity to pass across whatever it is. And if you think about it like that, you will notice that there are really no bounds as to how you can push things. You would then realize that you can use even digital marketing to actually push communications, for example, even though it might not be the best use of your dollar, but there might be ways that you can actually do it if you know that it's the purpose of me doing this thing is to help people, number one, build trust, have a particular perception about my brand, and ensure that I have a good reputation for communication. And then marketing is interesting enough, it taps into something deep within me that just makes me want to take an action as well. So for me, the basics of how human beings behave and interact with communication, information, is basically where you begin to find ways to innovate.
Right. Okay. There's two questions, well, two back-to-back questions here who are kind of on the same topic. And this is exactly where we're going when we're talking about like the direction of innovation and meeting our goals, because now we're hopping into KPIs, folks. And LinkedIn user, sorry, LinkedIn user, I'm not saying your name. So if you want to share who you are, we would love that. Communication success is often measured through media sentiment, brand reputation, etc. How do you align that with marketing KPIs to integrate them into a unified performance strategy and create that balance? Before we answer that question, Ellen is building on that. Building on that, it feels like one of the challenges isn't just aligning the KPIs, but making sure both teams feel ownership over shared outcomes, especially when the success metrics are historically so different, brand reputation versus other outcomes. So let's go back to LinkedIn users' actual question, and how do we align sales and or not sales and marketing. I say sales and marketing all the time. Marketing and communications with like meaningful KPIs that speak to that unified performance strategy.
Yeah, this is actually an age-old problem with communications, right? KPI is the biggest enemy of anybody that is, in communications, especially maybe in an aspect of communications like public relations as well, because it's usually very hard to measure the impact that communication has. But the good thing is, as we continue to, technology continue to evolve, we begin to see ways that we can start to measure, performance. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to measure, okay, key performance indicators. What are those things that we're going to point at to say, yes, communications is working, yes, marketing is working. The truth is, communications and marketing are actually heading towards the same destination, right? They're supposed to work in tandem to be able to get to a certain destination. Marketing is going to be big on lead generation or demand generation. We want people to continue to ask about this, but communication is about, okay, when they're asking about it, what is compelling them to want to associate with me? What is compelling them to want to do things with me? So I think from my experience, one of the ways I've really start to try to help to figure out, this whole KPI conversation with regards to how do you align with marketing KPI is, number one, you have to be part of the creation of that KPI. It's usually hard when KPIs are thrown at you and then you're expected to just magically make them happen, right? It's important to be at that conversation where we're saying, what do we want to achieve? What are those things we want to use as an indication for performance? That's, these things we're doing is making sense. And it's important for you to sit at that table when we're coming up, and it's done collaboratively to say, for example, media sentiment is fine. We're getting a lot of mentions on the news. People are talking positively about the brand, but also, how is that contributing to maybe sales, for example? Or how is that contributing to what the marketing team is doing, for example? So for me, just thinking about it, like that, this is something I've run into a lot of times to say, how do you really, really say, how does media sentiment, really becomes like KPI? How do you say, okay, simply because we put out this communication that somebody has gone ahead to buy what we're selling, or KPIs? So for me, I think one of the best ways I've come about it is say, while we'll definitely measure the same things we're measuring, like media sentiment, use a lot of platforms and channels, tools that we have out there to say, what are people saying about our brand? And then the most important thing is, what we want them to know, is it aligning with what they're saying? That is the big way to really start measuring KPIs for communication. So there is media sentiment. People are saying things about us, but what exactly are they saying? What are the themes of communication and conversation out there? And how does it align with the things that we said we want to build? Are we beginning to align with certain kind of maybe influencers or certain kind of people that hold certain kind of voices to show that, yeah, they really understand what we're doing? So first of all, while you're looking at those marketing sentiments, what are the themes of conversation? What are people saying? What are those reports saying? And how does it align with the thing that we say we want people to know? If we have alignment in that sense, then you understand that, yeah, your communication is actually working, is making sense. And then secondly, how are we seeing that play out in terms of how people interact and buy our products? So for example, we have the marketing teams measuring KPIs like, okay, we reach this amount of people, we're getting people, maybe we're getting engagement or demand, generating demand as well. But again, we're going to be looking at it in like a time continuum to say, between when we started putting out this kind of communication, or when we started pushing this type of brand, or because of the messaging, are we seeing an increase in the people taking up our product? Because at the end of the day, you have to make a lot of inferences, especially when you're dealing with communications, especially like things like public relations. You have to find those connections by yourself to say, first of all, we're seeing positive media sentiment is aligning with what we want to say. Secondly, we're seeing movement in terms of people demanding our products, even though not directly as a result of maybe people like directly as a result of it because you saw a press release or because we saw some certain kind of alignment. But it's important to find a way to make those inferences by yourself. But my advice would always be, sit at the table where these KPIs are being generated, be part of the process of generating the KPIs. So it's clear what you're measuring in the first place. And secondly, is there an alignment with the themes of communication, even though they are sentiments? And is there any kind of relationship that you can make between the demand you're seeing and the work that you're putting out? You have to stand up for yourself, especially when it comes to communications and KPI. This is a hard conversation, but you have to figure out ways to say, how can I connect the dots to say, yeah, it's because of this action that we're seeing this increase. But there's no one way to it at all.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember here, I always tell people this with like social media posts in particular, is that one social media post is like one sentence in your book. Okay? So it has to make sense as part of the book, but it's not the whole story. Every marketing and communications, and maybe this is one of the reasons why they tend to get slammed together, is they are rolling up to the same thing. As you said, they are writing your book, and some of them are doing some parts and some of them are doing other parts, but they're all working together to write the book. And I really love what Ellen shared about making sure both teams feel ownership over the shared outcomes, because I do think it's very common from a KPI point of view to say, like, these are your outcomes, these are your outcomes, and I've done some kind of crazy math that says that those outcomes roll up to the upper outcome. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of intuition, there's a lot of feeling that goes into this, and we could take away a bunch of communication stuff and notice that the impact that that has on marketing. And we can experiment in these arenas too if people get like really interested in it. But at the end of the day, in marketing, there's no direct attribution almost ever because people are interacting with brands in multiple different ways. We don't control as the marketer when they are going to have the need for that product, right? I only need a new pair of shoes when my old pair of shoes wear out. You don't control when my old pair of shoes wear out. You don't make me walk every day or not walk every day. Or like I actually wore a pair of shoes out in Europe in a month, right? And I was like, oh, either those were not very good shoes or like I did a lot of walking. But the point is, like, we don't control that as the business. And as marketing, we only create the space for people to know that I have shoes and you can come and get these shoes today and they're on sale. So if that works for you, then come and get them, right? Like there's lots of other pieces of the puzzle that we do not control. And so trying to get to like direct attribution towards a KPI in marketing, I've never seen it be true. I've never been able to see someone trace all of their sales leads back to how many people read the blog, right? Like it's just not a thing because there isn't one thing. There's multiple experiences. People are having experiences of salespeople. People are cousins with the guy who works in delivery, right? Like there's lots of things that can't be attributed to marketing, which doesn't mean that it's not doing its job. And I also don't like to give marketing the out and being like, marketing doesn't have to be responsible for anything because it can't be directly attributed. The point is that, right? It's about creating that like cohesive web of marketing and communications that delivers stuff. And if there's a hole in the web, then we need to address the hole in the web. But like we are heavily dependent on each other. And if we are that heavily dependent on each other, then we really need to work together to own that shared outcome. And I love what you said, Nonso, about like sitting at the table, even to like create the KPIs. I went through this process with a company that I worked with previously in terms of, we used performance standards, which is like the Dale Carnegie. I think it's the better version of KPIs, but there's a whole bunch, right? Like OKRs and I don't even know what they all stand for. But the point is, when people are invested in creating that, they also have that understanding of when I do a thing, this is how it drives the results. And being able to come in and do that work in a meaningful way every day has a huge impact on the results of the work as well.
Yeah. And I think just to speak, I think before we go.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, are you watching the clock? Because I'm watching the clock and Nonso has a hard stops.
Yeah, just to speak to Ellen's point in addition to like the LinkedIn user with regards to aligning KPIs, but making sure that both teams feel ownership. I think one of the best way to do is to sit down and create the funnel together, right? Understand that consumers or whoever is interacting with your brand follows a journey. There's a place where they either get to see your brand and then they find out more information. Most of the time, communication will come in the consideration stage, right? To say, people have seen me, they liked what they saw, but they want more information. They want to know if these people are about the same thing. And then for the communication team is to understand where you fall within that funnel. You understand that you fall within the consideration stage, and then you have to put in the work to ensure that whoever sees the brand and goes to look for more information is seeing the right thing. Either it's a news article or is a blog or is a social media, that the message is really clear why you're doing it. And then it's now helps that whole conversion, meaning marketing helps to make sure we catch the people's attention, do a lot of beautiful things. Communication helps to make sure they understand why and understand who we are. And that comes together to help with conversion, which is like making that final decision. But it's hard to really own KPIs as teams, but definitely use your normal, media sentiment, see how much information is out there. Definitely use that to measure your, how you're doing in the market. But at the end of the day, you can't really, it's hard to tie it down to that final KPIs.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nonso's the one told me that he has a hard stop. I want to say thank you. So LinkedIn user was Indrani. Indrani, thank you for joining us. And Ellen and Shehu for sharing such wonderful comments and questions today. I think this allowed us to explore a lot more things. Nonso, if people are interested in staying in the conversation with you, in marketing and communications professional, then where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Oh yeah, so right here on LinkedIn, I'm pretty much active and joining conversations on LinkedIn, just Nonso Nnamdi. And I'm also building a small community called Strides. It's mostly to help, especially founders and marketing companies with small marketing teams to be able to access tools, especially when it comes to accessing like journalists, influencers, tools that basically would help you do communications and marketing in a way that is more effective with your budget. I'm also building that community. It's called Strides. You can actually join and then we can just have that conversation together.
Ah, so awesome. Nonso, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. To be on time, I'm going to leave it at that for today, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. And until next time, permission to do you.
All right.